Political chaos deepens in Libya as the prime minister resigns. 1 year after the shooting of an unarmed black teenager, Ferguson, Missouri remains a community in transition. And a new farming trend grows in Kenya. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Linord Moudou. This is Africa 54. Vincent Makore is off today. Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari is finding it difficult to clamp down on Islamist militants terrorizing his country's northeastern territory, and innocent lives continue to be lost in deadly attacks. At least 47 people were killed and dozens of others wounded when a bomb was detonated in a crowded market Tuesday afternoon in the town of Sabon Gari in Borno State. Although no one has claimed a responsibility for the blast, law enforcement authorities say the terrorist group Boko Haram is the prime suspect. The U.S. State Department strongly condemned what it says was a terrorist attack in Borno. According to Reuters, more than 600 people have been killed in raids and bombings by the insurgents since President Muhammadu Buhari took office on May 29th, promising to crush the group. For more on the fight against Boko Haram and other top issues facing the new Nigerian president, we have Channels TV reporter Cynthia Are joining us on the phone from Lagos. Good evening, Cynthia.
Good evening, Lenore.
First of all, tell us about what are the latest in terms of the bombing that happened Tuesday night?
I just spoke to our Borno correspondent, Blessing Tuna, literally 30 minutes ago, and she told me there's really no update. It's just that we've seen a beef up of security. Authorities aren't really saying much. We've just seen that security has intensified, but the death toll still stands at that number for what we know right now. And in truth, this is a Boko Haram attack, or at least a group affiliated with the sect. There's no disputing that.
So since President Buhari has been in office, one of his promises actually during the campaign was to really crash down on Boko Haram. How is he doing now? There have been a series of attacks since he's been in office. What can you tell us about that?
In truth, Nigeria is full of people who are understanding. We're very desperate for this menace to end, but we're also very understanding because this was a problem that was inherited. It's a 6-year insurgency. He's been in power for, what, about 3 or 4 months? Mm-hmm. So realistically, it's not possible to remove this threat of the Boko Haram sect in just 16 or 15 weeks. But we have seen a lot of effort from the president in terms of paying various visits to the United States, for instance, from which he just returned. He's also been visiting regional countries like Chad and Cameroon, all in a bid to bring together more hands to tackle the sect. So we're seeing a lot of efforts from the president. We don't expect magic, and we do know there will continue to be losses. That's the unfortunate truth, but people are satisfied that he hit the ground running. He's making as much effort as is needed. And basically, literally like some hours ago, we did confirm that there is a new leader of the sect, which has emerged. That's Muhammad Daoud. And that was confirmed by the Chadian president. So that also points to the fact that the former leader, that's Abubakar Shekau, probably has been killed because we've not seen him in recent videos. And that shows that, the military has not taken this lightly. It is a very serious issue. All hands are on deck, and we're being patient, but we're also desperate for something to be done. But we're very understanding. We know that the president is not sleeping, and as Nigerians, we're content with that.
Okay, another campaign promise was to crack down on corruption. On Monday, he appointed a corruption committee. Tell us how that is being received and really what is expected of this committee.
People are excited about the committee because it has, if you see the caliber of people who form part of the committee and who it's being headed by, we're talking about, for instance, a professor, Itse Sage. He's a prominent professor and of law and civil rights, basically. And when you see the caliber of those who are in this committee, you know that they're really all about anti-corruption. That's the truth. So people are really excited, and we've already seen that the president has gone ahead to ask the Ministry of Finance to explain what happened to foreign loans that were meant to be used for real projects. About over $1 billion was was invested in that, but we understand that only 400 million is left concerning that loan. So this is just a fruit of what was set up this week. We've already seen that it's already yielding results. So people are excited, and I think, in truth, the president has lived up to what he said he would do. We might not see the results immediately, but it does not dispute the fact that he's doing what he said he would do.
Okay, we'll be keeping an eye on it. Cynthia, thank you so much. And Cynthia Are of Channels TV reporting from Lagos. Now, the United Nations Special Envoy to Libya is urging the country's warring factions to agree on a national unity government by the end of this month and endorse it with a vote by early September. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Libya's internationally recognized government says he will resign if demanded by the people. Esther Gitowi-Ewart has more.
Prime Minister Abdallah Al-Thani faced sharp criticism in a televised interview with questions from viewers blaming the government for lack of services and said he would step down Sunday if that was the solution the public wants. A government spokesman told Reuters that Mr. Thani's comments were not an official resignation. Meanwhile, Libya's rival factions began a new round of peace talks Tuesday in Geneva. Bernardino Leon, the United Nations Special Envoy to Libya, urged the parties to agree on a national unity government by the end of the month.
What Libya is facing now is deeper chaos and division of the country. So I hope all the Libyan actors will be wise to avoid this scenario, to expedite the talks and to reach an agreement very soon.
Leon said a good sign an accord can be reached in the next 3 weeks is that all members of the warring factions are participating in the peace talks in Geneva.
This will very much depend on the political will and on the creativity, on the wisdom of the parties to bring good names, good proposals on the table. So if this was possible, then the endorsement and final voting and signing of the agreement could happen in the first weeks of September.
Last month, Libya's political leaders signed a UN-brokered power-sharing deal, but the Islamists who seized control last year of Tripoli refused to participate. Leon said he will build on that signing by focusing on persuading the holdouts to agree to the unity government accord during this round of talks. Libya is bitterly divided between an internationally recognized government in the eastern city of Tobruk and an Islamist government based in Tripoli. The country has been in a political turmoil since longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown and killed in 2011. Esther Gitowi-Ewart, VOA News, Washington.
South Sudan rebels loyal to former Vice President Riek Machar are denying reports of a split in the ranks. This news came as two top rebel commanders announced Tuesday that they had split with Machar's forces. The two generals say they will now fight against both Machar's rebels and the South Sudan army. But a rebel spokesman says there is no split in the rebel movement, but rather a defection by what he calls two disgruntled generals who have been reshuffled out of the rebel command hierarchy. For the latest on the South Sudan peace talks situation, John Tanza, host and managing editor of VOA's South Sudan in Focus radio program, joins us on the phone from Addis Ababa. Good evening, John.
Good evening, Linord.
So, John, is it a split among the rebels or a defection by two commanders?
Well, I wouldn't call it a split because these two commanders were relieved of their duties 2 weeks ago. And when they were relieved of their duties, they decided now to form a splinter group. But when I was speaking to rebel authorities here, they're saying their colleagues are free to go wherever they want to go. They were, downplaying it. They said it's not anything major and it will have no impact on the current search for peace in the country.
Okay, well, where do things stand in terms of the peace and negotiations, actually?
Well, I will say the delegate 12 meeting from yesterday until today emerged from their meeting this evening, and they came up with a list of laundry of disagreement.
So a list of laundry of disagreement, which include the demilitarization? Yes.
They disagreed on formation of a government during the transitional period. They disagreed on format for sharing power. They disagreed on type of leadership that they want. They disagreed on the system of governance that they will use. And the list is just endless.
And do they agree on anything at all?
Well, they have agreed to form a government of national unity. But the details is very sketchy. And neither side is willing to tell you how the government will look like.
And so the prospect of that happening is very, very slim.
Well, the final decision rests on the shoulders of rebel leader Riek Machar and President Salva Kiir. They are expected to meet on Friday and look at the recommendations of their delegates and make a final, recommendation that might end up into a peace agreement.
How do the people of South Sudan feel about this whole process? Have you been able to speak to some people?
Well, I've spoken to some independent delegates at the talks, and they are disappointed that these two leaders, or these two delegates, are all negotiating. Let me use their words. They are negotiating for their position in the government that will be formed if a peace agreement is signed. And so some delegates are saying these leaders are selfish. They're only thinking about themselves, not about the people who are suffering in South Sudan.
So a sentiment that it's very personal, but not about the country's interest.
Right. That's they're saying the leaders are not putting the interests of their people in front of them. Rather, they are putting their interests first.
Okay, well, John, thank you so much, and we'll be keeping an eye on your report. VOA's John Tanza reporting from Addis Ababa. Now, according to recent studies, the number of illegal immigrants crossing the U.S. border has dipped in recent years. However, the concern of unaccompanied children at the U.S.-Mexican border reached a peak last year, triggering a crisis that renewed the debate over immigration reform. VOA's Victoria Machi reports.
1 year after the crisis of migrant children crossing the border, the prospects for solving the problem seem distant. U.S. lawmakers have been unable to reach an agreement because, observers say, of political polarization in Congress over the immigration issue.
Ultimately, one of my hopes and desires was that, we'd get them back in country as quickly as possible to show that that $5,000 or $8,000 they paid to the coyotes was wasted money.
Right now, they can't go to their government and say, this is a crime that I'm reporting. Can you help me relocate to another place where I'm safe?
Meanwhile, the Obama administration is stepping up its efforts to prevent history from repeating itself.
Bueno, el mensaje es claro, nuestras fronteras no están abiertas para la inmigración ilegal.
The message is clear. Our borders are not open for illegal immigration. On those who do not have a reason to have a visa or humanitarian protection, we will enforce our laws. There will be deportations. It is important not to endanger the lives of their loved ones.
Thousands of unaccompanied minors and families are still crossing the border from Mexico into the United States. While the number is not as high as in 2014, many analysts find it disturbing.
In humanitarian terms, it can be a disaster, really a Holocaust.
Adam Isaacson, an expert on regional security, says that more intensified border controls could compromise the human rights of these children who left their countries because of insecurity caused by gang violence.
If they are fleeing, and without giving them a chance to defend themselves, we ship them immediately to their countries, we as Americans would really be responsible for deaths and much suffering.
According to the latest report from the Department of Homeland Security, juvenile arrests at the border have been reduced by more than 50% compared to last year. For Angelica Herrera, I'm Victoria Mackey, VOA News, Washington.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, a year after the shooting of Michael Brown, Ferguson, Missouri is still in transition. Stay with us.
This This is Greenbeat for a healthier planet.
The disappearance of forests leads to erosion, soil degradation, and other environmental problems. But much of what has been lost may be regained simply by planting trees. John Leary is the Executive Director of Trees for the Future.
Planting trees is a real critical anchor in the community, and it's going to a real essential thing to return tree cover to the degraded lands.
Leary says they have planted more than 100 million trees since their inception about 25 years ago, and they are especially focused on sub-Saharan Africa.
And we guide farmers through the process of planting fast-growing and thorny trees that help revitalize and stabilize fields.
Last year, Trees for the Future put more than 20 million trees into the ground.
Really trying to help 4,000 families plant their way out of poverty.
The plan, says Leary, is to grow the program to reach 10,000 families in the next few years. I'm Rebecca Ward for VOA's Greenbeat.
Now, the shooting death of an unarmed black teenager by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, touched off a wave of protests in the St. Louis suburb that continues to place it in the headlines 1 year after the incident. As VOA's Ken Farabos report, some residents are trying to shine a positive light on a community still in transition.
One criticism many Ferguson residents harbor is that the media covering the unrest over the past year has painted the wrong picture of their community.
They make it seem like everybody out here just starting chaos, acting like maniacs. They talk about people shooting, but they don't talk about the positive things that's out here going on.
Resident Kenneth Wheat agrees and says it's due in part to the fact that the protests have drawn outsiders who confronted his own family at a local market last year.
Yelling, screaming, cursing, pushing people, and that was the one side that most of the American world hadn't seen. You know, most folks assumed that we were the ones who were pushing them around and were yelling.
He decided to protect the reputation of his friends, his neighbors, his community. To do that, Wheat says he got more involved. One way is volunteering at the I Love Ferguson store, located not far from the Ferguson Police Department. Wheat says he isn't alone, and that to him, one example of the positive change in Ferguson is how 1 year later, more of the community is getting involved.
I volunteer because I want people to know about Ferguson and that we're a friendly, loving community, not at all what was portrayed.
Jacqueline Damer works alongside Wheat and 23 other volunteers at the store, which gives the profits it generates from the sale of Ferguson merchandise back to the community. She says much of the money has gone to help businesses damaged in last year's violence.
We've given over $100,000 to various businesses.
While daytime shines light on some of those new storefronts and the change underway in Ferguson a year after Michael Brown's death, nightfall brings the protests and the media back to the streets and the unwelcome narrative that this place remains a dangerous tinderbox. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Ferguson, Missouri.
As Ferguson, Missouri observes the first anniversary of riots sparked by the shooting of 18-year-old Michael Brown, Los Angeles marks the 50th anniversary of the riots in a poor African-American neighborhood, also sparked by a clash between white policemen and black residents. VOA's Latika Hoke reports that some protesters from the 1965 Watts Riots still have vivid memories of that event.
Masai Minters walked on this street 50 years ago when riots broke out. He was 15 years old at the time.
That was the heart of Watts, right there at the park and along 103rd Street. You can see the helicopters buzzing around, the fires burning, the plumes of smoke, the people in the streets, the red lights flashing, the noise, the activity. It was electric, it was crazy, it was busy.
On August 11th, 1965, a routine traffic stop in Watts turned into a scuffle between police officers and the African-American community from that poor neighborhood. The angry protest over rough police treatment of the man who was stopped and his mother escalated into 6 days of violent riots that shook Los Angeles. Hundreds of buildings were damaged, 34 people were killed, and more than 1,000 were wounded. An exhibit at the local college, built soon after the riots, documents the violence.
This is a photograph of Marquette Fry and Ronald Fry. Marquette was the gentleman who was pulled over by the police that sort of started the rebellion.
There was another uprising in the area in 1992 after a videotape surfaced of police brutally beating black taxi driver Rodney King.
The reason that LA hasn't exploded again is because we're aware of the past. The police department's aware of the past.
Watts residents say they have learned from experience that violence does not help.
People in Watts understand that having another riot just reinforces the stigma that's already going on. So to eliminate that and get rid of this idea that it's just such a dangerous place, people are not willing to put themselves in that situation all over again.
The Watts neighborhood remains persistently poor, but relations between its residents and a more diverse police force have improved. Residents hope the same will happen in other black neighborhoods in the United States. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Aviation experts at a laboratory in France continue to examine the piece of debris from Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 that washed up on the shores of Reunion Island in the western part of the Indian Ocean. The investigation involves searching for clues with the naked eye and under powerful microscopes. VOA's Caroline Pursuti visited a forensic laboratory in the U.S. to show us how it's done.
Joe Reynolds is a forensic engineer.
This piece appears to be in normal condition with the green paint still showing.
Think of him as an aviation detective, solving airplane crashes.
Scrapes, scratches, dents are all important to understand.
Reynolds and his company RTI do exactly what aviation experts in France are doing as they analyze the debris of Flaperon from MH370, the plane missing in the Indian Ocean since March of last year. Flaperons help steer the plane as well as add lift during takeoff and landing. You may have seen the flaperons from a passenger window, moving up and down as the plane takes off and lands. If Reynolds were investigating the MH370 debris, he says the good condition of the flaperon would be evidence of the plane's position upon impact.
I think it tells us that the angle of entry or impact with the sea was at a very low angle.
When the RTI group is hired to investigate a crash, their first task is confirming the part belongs to the plane. This scanning electron microscope analyzes the paint.
Each one of those red peaks represents an element on the periodic table.
That kind of test could also be used by experts in the MH370 investigation because the plane's paint is a formula unique to the Boeing 777. RTI says the next step for MH370 investigators is to determine the cause of the crash.
Sometimes at first glance you can figure out some evidence, like these airplane parts. This one shows the original green paint, and an adjacent part certainly shows damage caused by heat.
We want to find out why this happened, what caused this excessive heat.
So engineers look at the force which detached the part from the airplane. In this case, the rivets were stripped off at an angle. This digital high-resolution microscope travels inside the holes for a closer look. It's painstaking, slow work, but the evidence from a lab can solve mysteries. In Stevensville, Maryland, Caroline Pursuti, VOA News.
It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, a new type of farming takes root in Kenya. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. Africa marks 1 year since the last case of recorded polio in Somalia on August 11, 2014. In Ghana, public sector hospitals are paralyzed. That's due to strike action by state-employed doctors over conditions of service. In South Africa, new immigration laws have negative impact on the lucrative tourism industry. In Algeria, pilgrims battle summer heat to cast prayers from a summit in the country's northern Kabylie region. Finally, in the DRC, artists showcase their talent at the first edition of Kin Act, a cultural street festival in the capital, Kinshasa. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.
I am Sheikha Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here is what's trending. It's the latest Hollywood health craze. Gone are the days when the healthiest liquid lunch on offer in Los Angeles was a shot of juice. The humble soup has been reinvented as the latest wellness trend, and souping diets are growing in popularity. Fans of souping say they like it because the fiber and protein remain, unlike with juicing, which makes eating soup more satisfying. An average souping diet includes 5 to 8 soups per day, some hot, some cold, some with fruits, some with vegetables, some with chunky, some blended. And speaking of food trends, this one's out of this world, literally. 3 astronauts aboard the International Space Station this week took their first bites of space food. With an eye towards giving astronauts on future long-haul missions the ability to grow their own meals and enjoy fresh produce in space, NASA has been studying how plants grow in orbit. How about that? The astronauts first tasted the lettuce plain before dressing it up with some olive oil and balsamic vinegar. Meanwhile, back here on Earth, hydroponic farming is starting to take root in Kenya. Farmer David Chege, a former chemist, has been trailblazing the technology and is eager to share his knowledge with other farmers. Chege hydroponically grows lettuces, oranges, and tomatoes. He says the nutrients facilitate better yields with less energy. He also says there are other huge benefits of farming hydroponically in Kenya and in other parts of Africa. Chege has installed more than 200 hydroponics systems for other farmers in Kenya and Uganda. And that's what's trending today. That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 300 and 600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks for watching, and good night from Washington.
The quest for the freedom to vote saw many struggles.
We were murdered for the right to vote.
Many triumphs.
It's unleashed the talent, the dreams, and the inspiration of millions of Americans.
Yet the fight continues.
I'm very disappointed because, you know, we worked so hard in so many years and we've seen the injustice.
A 4-part special report, The Freedom to Vote, The Last 50 Years, only on VOA.
Music is something that brings people together.
Music educates, it motivates, it's a bridge.
Music. Allie.
On
VOA.
I am Sheikha Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent.